So I'm glad to have you on the channel, Bishop. You're the Bishop of the Anglican Diocese of Christ Our Hope. Yeah.
That's correct, yes.
Technically, you're the Bishop Coadjutor.
Coadjutor or coadjutator.
Okay. Agitator?
Agitator, however you like to use the term.
Yeah.
So, yes.
That's super cool. So can you tell us a little bit of the history of, well, let's start with Christ Our Hope and then maybe how you became bishop, how you...
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the I'd call it the Anglican realignment that happened in the early 2000s was driven primarily by the Anglican province of Rwanda.
Yeah.
So they started a mission foray into North America called the Anglican Mission in America. And I happened to be the youth minister at the church where the one of the clergy made bishop was the rector, Chuck Murphy. And so I kind of got swept up into that, and it was an aggressive mission, church planting venture, and while allowing us to do something sort of untapped in North American Anglican history, which was to be legitimately Anglican through a foreign Anglican province. So that's a big no-no in Anglican border crossing. So part of AMIA, and AMIA, a number of the churches that we helped plant and start, when AMIA decided to be a little bit more independent, and then the formation of the Anglican Church in North America happened, there were a number of us that were still significantly connected relationally, organizationally, to Rwanda. So we formed an interim step before the Diocese of Christ Our Hope called PAIR USA. Mm-hmm. PAIR is the acronym for the Province Église des Anglicana, my accent's terrible, on French, for this dual citizenship of our churches who said we still want to be Rwandan, but we see the future heading towards the ACNA. And so we formed that together, and then in 2016, the Archbishop of Rwanda said, go be fully ACNA. And that was the foundation. That was sort of the beginning point of the Diocese of Christ Our Hope. So we're 7 years officially on paper, but a number of our churches and clergy are 15, 20 years in relationship with each other.
Wow.
So
that's super cool. And so the Diocese of Christ Our Hope, I believe, was a part of this broader movement, and there was another diocese on the West Coast?
So there were 3 regions of PAIR USA, the Southeast region, the Mid-Atlantic region, and the Western Rocky region. So the Western Rocky region became the Diocese of Rocky Mountains, and my good friend Ken Ross is their bishop. The Southeast region did something I thought was also really noble, is they realized there were enough other Anglican dioceses in their geographic region that they gave churches to those different dioceses. So they populated several different places. And then lastly, the Mid-Atlantic region became the Diocese of Christ Our Hope.
That's super interesting. So would you say there's still a noticeable connection between, say a church here, people in Christ Our Hope, and then those churches that now are in the Southern Diocese and then the churches in the Western Rocky?
Yeah, I think the connection that exists, obviously, is we're part of the Anglican Church in North America. Secondly, many of us still have this high affinity for Rwanda. So I've been to Rwanda a number of times. There's those long-lasting relationships. The old adage, don't forget from where you've come from, that sort of thinking. We all came out of Rwanda to some degree. Certainly a diocese develops a life of its own. So a lot of those former very close working relationships, they've just decreased, not out of desire, but out of practicality. So the Diocese of Rocky Mountains, a lot of friends there, they have their own life and things, and our diocese the same. But we still have a common heritage with Rwanda.
And so it's been about, 15-ish years since ACNA and all of that's kind of started to unfold. How much has the character changed? How much, how many churches have been planted since then in our diocese that don't really have this connection to the Rwandan?
So, I'd say that both the Diocese of Rocky Mountains and our diocese, there's probably more than half of our churches are new plants since we formed this diocese.
Yeah.
The ACNA, when it started, there was something like 400 churches in 2009 that helped form it. Today, there's nearly 1,000 when you look at all of North America. And we're not even counting the churches that we're seeing start to develop in Mexico and Cuba that are a part of us relationally through other systems. So, big emphasis on church planting, a lot of growth. There are churches that have ceased to exist, just natural attrition and all that. But we're planting probably as many as are phasing out for one reason or another.
Yeah. And so in that sense, you get to be kind of a global presence. Is there a kind of tension between trying to make sure that there's a wide enough spread? So say someone wants to plant a church in, kind of rural upstate New York. There's not really a church there. I don't know if I made that up, of course. But and so we're saying, okay, well, let's strategically cover some zonage. Is it more interest appeal oriented? How does that kind of work, especially for our diocese?
So there's two types of beast, if you will. There's the dioceses that see themselves more nationally, and we call those affinity dioceses. They have a larger geographic reach. So the Diocese of Living Word, the Missionary Diocese of All Saints, C4SO. And so they see North America and to some degree the U.S. as their mission field. There are other dioceses like ours, the Diocese of South Carolina, the Diocese of Pittsburgh. They have a pretty bounded geographic set, and that's where they see their mission field. And I think both of those are necessary out of the chute. Obviously, over time, the gravity of geographic proximity is going to kick in.
So even if, say, there's a, as far as I understand, there's a diocese of the Mid-Atlantic, which kind of is within our breadth, and there's some overlap there. Is there coordination between the dioceses for church planting?
In some places, yes. In some, I'd say at our best, if you will, the bishops of those regions that kind of overlap on top of each other, I know a lot of them are trying to work collaboratively as much as possible. So in our case, the Diocese of Mid-Atlantic, our Bishop Steve Breedlove, Bishop John Guernsey, were very close friends, and they sort of looked at the map and said, where are you working? Here's where we're working. How can we bless each other, collaborate, and communicate where new works are happening? The new bishop, Chris Warner, is also a good friend, become such. So we're having those same kind of collaborative conversations. In the West, there are 5 Western dioceses that they've actually even started to synchronize safeguarding systems, ordination and credentialing systems, and the like. So again, gravity of geography is going to come into play, where these places are going to have to work better together and more cooperatively.
Yeah, and slowly over time, maybe they'll be coalescing and kind of jurisdictional shifting.
Sure.
So let's kind of go back and say, so what, from your perspective, you were, what's your kind of testimony? How did you end up in the ACNA affiliated with Anglicanism in general?
I'd say in the early 90s, I rode the wave of a lot of evangelical kids who found Anglicanism and what we call Canterbury Trail very attractive, because we were products of a certain flavor of Christianity, but as we started to go along in our faith, we found things like history and roots and global connections and sacraments very appealing, and the Anglican Church provided a platform for us to experience all those things, especially as new clergy and leaders. So I came in on that wave. In fact, there's a famous book called Evangelicals on the Canterbury Trail.
Yeah.
That when I read it, it's like, that describes me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's what I'm excited about. And certainly being in the Anglican Church, I've seen a lot of the beautiful things that book held up come true.
Yeah.
So.
And so that would have been in the 90s. Would you have entered the Episcopal Church at that time? Yeah.
Started out as a youth minister in the Episcopal Church, and a lovely church in Midland, Texas. And from there went to seminary.
Yeah.
So I was taking seminary classes through Trinity Episcopal Seminary at the time in Ambridge, but I was at an extension site in Pawleys Island, South Carolina. Then you have the Anglican Mission in America's invention, if you will, in the early 2000s. And so while I was finishing my seminary degree, I moved to Charlotte, finished there with Reformed Theological Seminary, but planted a church while I was in seminary in North Charlotte.
So how were you privy to that? Were you kind of in circles of kind of, Episcopalians who were a little bit worried about the trajectory of the denomination? Did you kind of come into the Episcopal Church knowing there would be these kinds of, movements, that global communion was kind of coming together about it already? Did you have any reservations about becoming Anglican?
I had no idea.
Yeah.
There was, if you will, some sort of family crisis going on.
Yeah.
So when I joined the Episcopal Church in the mid 90s, I joined a church that was, I'd call it the three streams world.
Yeah.
A reverence for history and tradition and apostolic authority, a belief that the Holy Spirit is still very active and present in extraordinary and ordinary ways, and then this evangelical John Stott, J.I. Packer, C.S. Lewis, biblical teaching and emphasis. So I came into that local Episcopal church that way, but the diocese I was in was not that. And I quickly realized this church was an anomaly in its diocese. And as I started to really understand better the Episcopal Church, that was the case in many places around the country. And so I remember I went through an early stage of ordination process in that diocese. And one of the clergy that was a part of that asked me two simple questions. I still remember. I've got two questions for you. Do you believe that Jesus was literally born of a virgin? And I was like, doesn't the whole church believe that? He was like, no, we dropped that 100 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, no way. Why? Then he said, second question, do you believe Jesus was literally raised from the dead, walked out of the grave? And I just remember thinking, sort of 1 Corinthians 15, if that's not true, why bother with all this stuff? Like, don't tithe, play golf on Sundays, drink your coffee, read your paper, live life to the fullest, get them as much as you can, as long as you can, sort of thinking. And so I realized there was a crisis of leadership and faith that was happening in the Anglican family, particularly in the United States and some other places around the world. I remember in 96, I wrote a letter after reading a book called Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism by John Shelby Spong, a bishop. I wrote him a letter, and he responded actually with a typewritten letter back very quickly. I was really impressed because he could have said, "Who are you, little youth minister kid?" But I realized quickly there was this chasm that was present in the denomination, which was those who still believed Scripture had authority, that it was true, that it was a guide for a guide to know God personally, as well as a moral guide to behavior and ethics, rather than a book written by people a long time ago who had their experience. But we modern people know that stuff's old. So that's the that's the experience I had in that denomination.
Yeah. And so you kind of started to realize, I imagine with lots of other clergy, lots of other laity in the Episcopal Church at that time. And for me and for a lot of my audience, that's like when we were kids. Like we don't remember that well.
Right.
So what were some of the concerns? What were, was there hesitancy? Was there kind of, pushback from the denomination? How was dealing with that kind of emotionally, spiritually,
Yeah. So in 1998, all the Anglican bishops of the world would gather every 10 years. In 98, they met and they voted on a resolution about human sexuality, which is really a derivative of biblical authority.
Yeah.
And overwhelmingly, 80% or so voted in favor of keeping the traditional moral ethic of human sexuality, marriage, singleness, and all that. And right after that, there was a group that said, we're going to stay faithful to that. Mm-hmm. And that group had to decide, are we going to stay in the system, mm-hmm. or are we going to go outside of the system? And I was hired to be a youth minister in South Carolina at a church that said, there's an inside strategy, sort of stay in, fight the good fight. Mm-hmm. And that's very noble. I mean, a guy I really love to read is Charles Simeon, who stayed in the church and fought for the church. And as well as a group that said, we're going to go outside of the system to international support. Mm-hmm. And for a while, those two groups found themselves in some tension.
Yeah.
Like, if you're inside and you're fighting, you're like, you guys are leaving, you're quitters.
Yeah.
And if you're outside fighting and you're looking at the inside strategy going, you guys are a bunch of compromisers.
Yeah.
And there was some bumps and bruises over that time, but it was I didn't grow up in the Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
So I work with people who they've had to walk away from buildings that their great-grandparents bought, and helped pay for and built and this long heritage in. So to leave that, to forsake that was spiritually hard for some.
Yeah.
God has provided, and it's amazing to see what's happened, but it's a tough time.
Yeah. I think we're going to have to wrap up soon, but do you have any advice? I've got a lot of people in my audience, just did a census recently, about 50% of my audience is Anglican. Half of those people are ACNA. About 13% are Episcopal today. And so they're in the American kind of Anglican context. I get so many comments about people who want this to flourish and to grow and to do well. Yeah. And they're anxious for the future of the denomination. And is there any way that, any advice you would give the average, especially layman in the denomination?
Definitely. So, Jesus said the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Yeah. So the big C universal work of God's kingdom will not stumble or fail. Mm-hmm. So our hope is not in a certain stripe or tribe or sign on the door to be that promise coming true on. At the same time, I am encouraged with the future of the ACNA, even though it has some bumps and bruises and there's some hard conversations to have, is that I see a lot of people who really want to see it thrive. And if you really want to see something thrive, you have two choices. You can sit on the sidelines and watch and wait, maybe hedge your bets, like, well, we told you, or you can roll your sleeves up and get in the game and see a positive future come. So I want to say to those that are willing to roll up their sleeves, I've found as I've gotten involved and committed and now serve in leadership roles, it's much better to be on the team for me of rolling up the sleeves and working hard to see a great preferred future come. So very hopeful for the future. It's not going to work itself out overnight. It might be your generation, Joe, or those that follow you who bring a greater clarity and unity to the work of the ACNA in North America.
Definitely. Thanks so much for coming on, and thanks for talking about the history of Christ Our Hope, and thank you for your
Amen.